From the first and only vice presidential debate ahead of the U.S. elections, which will be held early next month. And it was a face-off between Vice President Mike Pence and Democratic Senator Kamala Harris as they locked horns on a variety of issues. And the first topic they discussed, obviously, was the coronavirus pandemic and the response of the Trump administration to the pandemic that has claimed over 210,000 American lives. Obviously, Kamala Harris, the running mate of Joe Biden, attacked Mike Pence and Donald Trump, saying that they have failed Americans in this time of the pandemic. Mike Pence responded. He, in fact, credited Donald Trump's leadership and said Trump's early response to the pandemic by shutting off travel from China and other parts of the world actually saved American lives. But it was a socially distant debate today, and the candidates were separated by plexiglass, reiterated barbs on a variety of issues. Apart from the pandemic, it was racial unrest in America that also dominated this debate, as well as the state of economy. And joining us on this broadcast for more on this, we are being joined by Susan Teherani, who's joining us from New York. Susan, it was a highly interesting debate. No personal name-calling, no personal attacks that we witnessed during the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Biden. Mike Pence and Kamala Harris stuck to a variety of issues. But let's start with the discussion on the pandemic. Who do you think came out on top?
Well, you know, it was interesting that the first question about the pandemic went to Kamala Harris, considering the fact that she's on the offense, and Vice President Mike Pence was forced to sort of have a defensive response to what Kamala Harris's question was. And the question posed to Kamala Harris was, how would you handle COVID-19 differently? And Kamala Harris came out and bashed the Trump administration of their handling of the pandemic. And another part of the question was, would you have closed down the country and the economy? But she failed to answer that. So regarding the COVID issue, I think Americans will undoubtedly know that Donald Trump maybe perhaps hasn't done the best job possible. I mean, that's what the polls show. But Mike Pence came very prepared with numbers. And as you mentioned, alluding to Anthony Fauci and saying that if this gets out of hand, we can go up to about 2 million deaths. President Trump saying even one is too much. But even, you know, the numbers are that we're seeing right now with 200,000, they're too much for the American public as well. But I would say Mike Pence came in prepared, and Kamala Harris didn't really allude how they would do something differently.
Absolutely. And, you know, once again, Mike Pence attacked China for the coronavirus pandemic, just like Donald Trump has been doing entire campaign. And like you mentioned, the question was asked to Kamala Harris about what they would do differently to deal with the pandemic. And Mike Pence again attacked Kamala Harris on that the Joe Biden campaign hasn't presented a really new plan that they would have implemented to deal with this pandemic. Let's also talk about the second big issue, that is the racial tensions that we've seen recently in America, especially the Black Lives Matter movement. What was the main debating point regarding that?
Yeah, you know, that was a comfortable spot for Kamala Harris, which we often saw sort of lose her composure, and just slightly compared to Mike Pence. I mean, I think the American public will agree that both candidates were very prepared, but expectations were higher for Mike Pence, and I think he sort of alluded to those expectations. Regarding racial tensions, it was a comfort zone for Kamala Harris. She talked about it. She talked about Breonna Taylor. She talked about the protesters. We know a lot of these demonstrators and the people who go out in the street and protest, they will be voting Democrat ultimately. So she was trying to be soft on crime in that sense. But then Mike Pence came out and sort of brought out her record of being a prosecutor in California and being very tough on crime. And she felt sort of uncomfortable with that exchange, but also she had to appear to be soft with the protesters, even when Mike Pence came out and said that there were looting, and we know what happened with with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor was wrong, but it is no excuse for looting and protesting, and sort of that exchange really came about. And I think the American public will sort of try to make a decision over there on which of these candidates really came out and supported the protests, the anger, but also alluded to the fact that there has to be law and order ultimately. A lot of people in the suburbs, families with kids, will be looking at that.
Right. Mike Pence stood by the police force, isn't it? He categorically said that Trump administration stands by the men in uniform while condemning the acts of horror that we have seen in the recent past, especially related to the death of George Floyd.
Yeah, I mean, police unions have supported the Trump administration. They haven't supported Joe Biden in any way. So that's an issue that the Trump administration has been playing on. Its base is very focused on law and order. They're uncomfortable with what's happening with the looting and sometimes even the peaceful protests. It's not really something that they've been playing upon, but that is a point that we knew Mike Pence would come in strong with the police unions because they know they have the backing of the police unions. But it's interesting that Kamala Harris, she wasn't really soft on crime when she was in California. So, and it's interesting that, you know, we kind of see different versions of Kamala Harris every now and then on how she's appealing to the voter and when is the right time to really be that, you know, tough prosecutor and when is the time to sort of soften things down. So we'll see what the American people think, but we've seen various versions of her.
Susan, obviously this has been a tough time, not only for Americans but the world over. The pandemic forced administrations to enforce lockdowns and impose restrictions. Businesses have been affected. So who came out on top when the discussion turned towards the state of American economy?
So, you know, we're having this debate at a time when the President of the United States has COVID. I mean, this itself is very significant. And that's on the backdrop of the economy at this point. And you know, it's hard to tell because on the one hand, the Trump administration has been defending its economic policies. On the other hand, we see millions of Americans out of jobs, layoffs being mounted. I mean, we see small businesses, airlines trying to stay afloat. So it's hard to imagine how Americans would be satisfied with Trump on the economy, despite the fact that earlier in the summer they were satisfied. But I think Kamala Harris sort of hammered into the psyche of the American public right now, and the majority who are having economic issues. And, you know, with the talk of the Trump administration halting discussions with the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi on a COVID stimulus package until after the elections. I mean, that itself, whether, depending on which side of the news you're looking at, whether you blame Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump, regarding the blame game, the jobs aren't coming back and the help isn't coming from the federal government. So I think we would give that to Harris to an extent, although we don't know what Joe Biden would have done differently.
Absolutely. You know, Donald Trump has been watching this debate between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, and throughout the debate he's been tweeting and attacking Kamala Harris.
Yes, I'm sorry. What was the question? They have been watching the debate. Yes, of course. What was the rest of the question?
Yes, that Donald Trump has been very closely watching this debate. He's been calling Kamala Harris a gaffe machine, in fact. You know, the discussion also turned towards a vaccine, isn't it? Kamala Harris, in fact, went on to say that if Trump endorses it, she wouldn't take it, but she would trust the advice of Anthony Fauci. What's the state of the vaccine in America? Is it any possibility that Americans would have a vaccine before the election date?
We don't know before the election date, and you know, it's interesting. While the news headlines often say that Donald Trump is pressing for a vaccine before election day, numerous scientists have come out and said that that's virtually impossible. Someone cannot force scientists to come out with a vaccine, so they'll do it at their due time, but we might see it earlier than later. I think what an interesting point that Mike Pence made was the fact that the Biden administration are playing politics with the vaccine, and I think he came in very strong. I mean, we'll see what the polls say, but he came in very strong, saying that don't undermine America's confidence in a possible vaccine. And I think that resonated with many people, that this issue is wider than politics, and we should really stand together and stand united when it comes to dealing with such a deadly virus. But maybe sooner than later. We'll see. But, as you know, there's always been conflicting reports in politics. There's so much at play, unfortunately, that it's hard to tell. But that was an interesting line coming from Mike Pence.
Surprisingly, China also dominated the discussions when it came to the state of economy, isn't it? Kamala Harris accused the Trump administration and Mike Pence of losing the trade war with China. And Mike Pence responded by saying that Joe Biden will never fight for it.
Yeah, I mean, the same question again was posed to Kamala Harris, and she didn't reply on how tough they would be on China and what the Biden administration considers China, a friend, a foe, an adversary. As you know, the question went. But Mike Pence came out and defended Donald Trump's policies regarding China, despite being unpopular at the very beginning. And he alluded to some facts that, for example, when Kamala Harris says, of course, we're going to be tough on China, but then also says we're going to go back to the Paris Accord. Well, there's a contradiction over there, considering the fact that the Paris Climate Accord gives China a sort of a waiver until 2023 regarding climate issues. So which way is it going to be? And I think that they were sort of flip-flopping on how they're going to deal with China. And the Democrats' records have often showed that they're not as aggressive as the Republicans when it comes to China. But Mike Pence really stood his ground and wasn't afraid to say that the virus came from China and the WHO, and China didn't let American observers go in and see what happened. So we'll have to see. But we didn't get a coherent answer from Kamala Harris in describing what China would be in a Biden administration.
Right. One final question to you, Susan. The real topic of discussion after the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden came out to be the issue of white supremacy. Did that feature in today's debate?
Yeah, it was there. It was going to be there. You know that the opponents of Donald Trump will use the issue of race and quote-unquote white supremacy at every opportunity they get to sort of bash the president for comments that he has or has not made. There's been recordings coming out from some media outlets showing that Donald Trump has numerous times condemned the KKK and so on and so forth, and Mike Pence sort of alluded and talked about those issues as well. But the issue with white supremacy and Donald Trump is just so built in to America's psyche on both sides of the aisle that it's very hard to change anyone's opinion on whether or not you believe Donald Trump is racist or not. I mean, at this point, if you think Donald Trump is racist, anyone can come and tell you that he did condemn once or twice. Maybe he didn't do the right thing with the Proud Boys, which was a gaffe on his part during the first presidential elections, but he's condemned it before. No one's going to believe you. His supporters will say, we've never seen such a president that's been so open and helping to the African American community and minorities as well. Pence pointed to his daughter and son-in-law as being Jewish and his grandchildren being Jewish as well, that kind of minority as well. So, the issue of race and white supremacy and all of that stuff is just so hardcore delved into the politics of the United States and the American psyche that it's hard to change anyone's mind. We'll see if anyone's mind's really changed.
Finally, Susan, very quickly, who do you think came out on top in this debate?
To quote Vice President Pence, I don't want to give my opinion as facts, as he noted a few times to Kamala Harris, but we'll have to see what the American people will decide. But I think that if there is anyone who stayed true to their base, it was Kamala Harris. I think her base are going to be very happy with how she performed and the topics that she brought up. And regarding Mike Pence, we'll have to see, but my guess would be that he changed more minds than not, and he had an opportunity to when he did have the opportunity, he spoke to the majority of the American public and not just to his base. So we'll see.
Susan, thank you so much for getting us all the details on the first and only vice presidential debate ahead of the November election.